Welcome to How's That Working For You, a podcast for the therapy curious. I'm your host, Dr. Zoe Krupka. If you're working in one of the many fields of mental health, we've made this space for you. Come join us in some reflection on these often very strange jobs that we do, in the hope that we can really get to the heart of how to improve our work and our own sense of how to be who we are within it. This podcast is brought to you by the Cairnmillar Institute. Cairnmillar is founded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their deep, enduring connection to land, waters, and community. The legacies of colonization and the ongoing effects of institutional racism have enduring effects on the mental health and well-being of First Nations people, and we hold this continuing dispossession in our minds and hearts as we explore the question of how to improve our work in the mental health field. Cairnmillar is more than just a not-for-profit organization. It's a vibrant community of students, clients, staff, alumni, and generous donors. Our hearts beat for better mental health, which has driven us for over 60 years. At CMI, we believe in a dynamic interplay between training, research, and clinical practice. These three pillars from our triple helix, each strengthening and informing the other. As a registered health promotion charity, we've been pioneers in counselling and psychotherapy in Australia. Our purpose is to enhance mental health through accessible psychological services and innovative professional education. That's where How's That Working For You comes in. This podcast is our way of sharing the extraordinary insights, anecdotes, and life lessons from the mental health field. We're pulling back the curtain to offer you a unique peek behind the scenes, aiming to deepen your understanding of this remarkable space. I'm a senior lecturer at CMI. I'm a feminist psychotherapist, supervisor, and researcher. I've worked in agencies, organizations, and private practice. I've trained in a number of modalities, including emotion-focused therapy and existential psychotherapy, and I have a primary interest in anti-oppressive practice. So, Annie, you're a clinical naturopath. We'll find out what that actually means from you. But you've also just completed your honors in psychology here at Cairnmillar. Ooh, congratulations.
Thank you.
So you'll soon be starting out life as a psychologist with an already strong knowledge of supporting mental health, but from a naturopathic perspective. So your research that you've just completed was on women who are assigned female at birth who have experienced a late diagnosis of autism. And one of the reasons I really wanted to speak to you about this was because this is also your experience as a neurodivergent autistic woman. You were both the researcher and an insider in this work. And I think you've got so much to share with us about how practitioners, we can become more helpful in that space. So I wanted to start by asking you, what was that experience of late diagnosis like for you? Because I know It prompted this research project.
It was just over 2 years ago now, and it was amazing, like completely life-changing, which is sort of what I wrote about in the thesis, that a lot of the participants also had the same sort of experience. It's sort of like a life before the diagnosis and life after. It's like a big stake in the ground of just, difference. But it was also, I want to say, it was confusing and a bit challenging to navigate as well, because there just isn't as much understanding of what autism looks like in people who aren't little boys, or stereotypical kind of presentations that you might see on TV or in films. So it was kind of a lonely process, and it can sort of continue to be a bit of a lonely process until you find your people who have also gone through it. So the process of doing the thesis and talking to the participants was really amazing, because we all had different experiences, but we had a shared experience of something that was pretty extraordinary to try and explain to someone who hadn't gone through.
I wonder, like, in that experience you had, and obviously in talking to your participants, there must have been moments that people said to themselves, this was really what drove me to push for this or to seek this, and that some of those moments must have been when people in our professions screwed up, missed really important things, and the kind of the agony of that. Is that?
Yeah, it is a big thing that I think you see a lot and you hear a lot, and people have a lot of experience of not enough training. So practitioners are doing the best they can, but they just don't know how to recognise more subtle signs. There's sometimes also a lot of dismissal, which I think can really dampen the experience for people of saying, oh, you're not autistic, you smile, or you give good eye contact, or, things like that.
You're empathic.
Exactly. Hyperverbal, and so that can be really disheartening for people too, because then they can kind of get excited about, oh my God, I think I've, figured everything out. My whole life suddenly makes sense. And you'll go somewhere with all this excitement, whether it's your therapist, the GP, a close family friend, and if you're met with no, or oh, I don't think so, or I can't see that, it can be it can kind of really dampen the excitement and the want to explore further.
Just the prompting, that idea of what you experience in that space when people miss you, you know, and you're kind of saying, people missed me and my participants, even when we went in and we said, look, I think I've got something here. And then the cold water thrown on that. I mean, it's my experience, my GP, who's fantastic, and I think she's worked as a GP probably for 50 years and one of the only bulk billing GPs still left, and would see. We won't link to her.
No. But she sees hundreds of patients a day. She's just amazing. When I went to her and said, I think I'm autistic, she said, I don't know anyone to send you to. And I was like, okay. You think of all the people she's seen, all the experience she's had, all the professional development she's probably had to do, and it was just this, like, I don't know. So that is really common. Or there's also just people saying absolutely not, and then that can also be, I had experiences as well because I was seeing a psychologist at the time, and I just felt like there was a pushback every time I would try and talk about it. It was sort of like, well, we can talk about your anxiety, and I was like, yeah, but the anxiety's coming from something, or so it can feel a lot like you're hitting a wall, which can feel quite frustrating, I think, for people, and disheartening, but I think that ultimately just comes from we're still building our understanding outside of a very narrow perspective.
So that real lack of training, that you go and see your therapist, and they're thinking anxiety, they're thinking depression, they're thinking any number of other things. For some of your participants, personality disorders, and they're kind of getting nowhere. But at the same time, it sounds like you're saying, without that training, there's no other framework that practitioners have to work from.
No. And it was interesting, I did a assignment earlier in the year, and it was on a case study of a female who was very anxious, had really bad social anxiety, was almost not leaving the house, and I was like, oh, this is likely autism. I could just see it within the case study. And so one of the conditions I put down was like, I think you could do a screener for autism, and the comments from the marker were that would give the person more anxiety. And I thought, that's so classic of thinking, like, if that was me and I was in that person's shoes, and I might have an understanding of why my anxiety is so bad, I would see that as more positive than negative. But it's like it's the view that I think also with autism, that it's such a bad thing. You don't, it's a terrible...
Avoid the stigma.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think there's a bit of that too, where there's still some taboo, which is not discounting, the people have very high needs, and it's, an incredibly debilitating experience in a neurotypical world being autistic. But there is sort of, there's definitely a stigma attached to it, I think, too, where people get uncomfortable with going anywhere near it. So
yes.
yeah.
And it's interesting because what I think about as a practitioner when you say that is that I have been very slow to get to the point of diagnosis. It's been very, very long for me to become acquainted with autism and neurodivergence more generally, because I've been working for 25 years or something. But one of my entry points into it was things that don't move. You know, we're working on this as trauma, or we're working on this as anxiety, or working on this as depression, and there's something fixed about it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my first entry point, but that's a long road for someone to go down.
Yeah.
What are the things, you know, you're talking about your own training and your case study and still what we're experiencing in training now. What are the things that we need to know? Like, where does it need to sit, do you think, in our curriculum so that everybody, all genders, but people assigned female at birth particularly, don't have to go down this 5, 10, 15, 20-year journey?
I think I totally agree with what you're saying about the stuckness around certain, because I always think anyone who's had long-term anxiety or long-term depression, they're a symptom of something. They are not there, you know, there's something going on underneath there. So that's always something that I think, I look at that in my own clients as a naturopath. I think, well, there's something, because from my own experience, you know, I was doing all the right things, but yet I was still anxious and depressed, and I couldn't ever work out. And now I'm like, oh, I just, you know, getting a diagnosis, I was like, that's why, you know, they come from this thing, and it's very simple. But I think, yeah, looking at clients, and especially people who are assigned female at birth, and saying, well, have they had this long-term struggle with their mental health? Are they very sensitive? Are they, do they have, you know, relationship issues, maybe in terms of like not having any friends or having difficulties with friends, you know, things that are quite subtle, and it's a little bit harder, I think, in women and people who are assigned female at birth because of how we're socialised. So that can be a layer on top that you just say, oh, it's just an emotional woman, or that person's a bit of a bitch, or, you know, like it's those sort of labels that we assign. And it's sort of, it's being able to really look at someone and see the subtle things going on, and starting to think, maybe if I put all these weird little things together, there's something else going on there. Yeah.
So thinking about how we look at things that are intractable or haven't been responded to, and thinking, okay, these are maybe jumping off points that we need to think about in terms of assessment.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, and this is something I know a lot of my supervisees ask me in this kind of neurodivergent space. Is it helpful to ask people to experiment with what it's like to accommodate their sensitivities and the difference that makes? Because a lot of your participants are talking about sensitivities to sound, to light, to smell, to particular textures. And when you're assigned female at birth, it's much more likely that you're taught to ignore those things, to force yourself to eat what's put in front of you, to put up with your partner's loud music or whatever it is. And that often we then don't notice the impact of, I don't know, riding on the train, or, you know, for me, the garbage. Yeah, what do you think about that, about the sort of accommodation of sensitivities and what people experience when they begin to do that?
I think that that's a really nice way to like get in touch with the real person inside the neurodivergent mask.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of that understanding sometimes, and it's funny, like there's a great saying that I love, it's like, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, because we're just so different.
Yeah.
So I caveat that by saying I can't speak for every experience, but I think that all those things that you are sensitive to, sometimes you have no idea. Yeah. Because you don't understand, and it's like getting that diagnosis, you go, oh, hang on, I don't like this noise, and actually I'm really overstimulated when I, go to the supermarket and it's peak time, or being in the car when it's hot is not a good idea. So I think stuff like that is great, but it's sometimes, I think without the diagnosis, people won't know what those things are. That makes it, especially if they're highly masking. They've literally just attempted to. Sometimes the mask slips, but they've just kind of tried to dial all of that down. But yeah, it's a really good way to start experimenting with what actually is going on for them.
When you say that, what I'm really curious about too, when we're thinking about training people or what we don't know, and I know I struggle with this with my clients too, is how do you help somebody notice that? Because they might notice at the end of the day this kind of overwhelm or inability to speak, or high levels of irritation, or I always think of like your cat's hair standing on end. How do they start to get in touch with what is it that is really setting me off?
It's such a good question. I'm trying to think, because now I'm a lot more attuned to when I'm overstimulated.
How did you do it? Like, how did you come to notice? And there must have been more and more things as you started to notice.
Yeah, they would slip out. Like, I was laughing thinking about this, because I used to, in my 20s, live in a share house with a guy, a bunch of people, and this one guy would come home at 3 o'clock in the morning and put on music really loud, and I would come out there and pull the cord out of the speaker. We would have this,
showdown.
Showdown. We're really good friends, which is so funny, because I'd say, I'm never talking to you again, because it was so upsetting for me to be woken up in the middle of the night, B, with just like thundering music. So I knew that there was I knew I had these little quirks of like, if someone's walking too closely behind me, I'd sort of, I don't like that feeling. But I think firstly getting the diagnosis allowed me to be a bit more curious about stuff. And then I'm trying to think, because now I can understand when I'm going to have a meltdown, which I never could understand previously. And I don't have a lot of them, but if I'm really pushed to my limit, it will usually be if I'm sharing space with someone, if someone's staying at my house and they're moving all my stuff around, and, and the house is a mess, I will get really, and I can be kind of rude or mean, and I'll think, well, what's going on? Whereas now I'm like, oh, that's what's happening. But it was a really subtle process, I think, of just having rather than, I think that's probably more what it is. It's once you get a diagnosis, or you realize that you aren't autistic or have ADHD or anything like that, you switch from being really mean to yourself to being a lot kinder. And I think with that switch, it opens up room for a lot more curiosity. Yeah. Rather than going, oh, you're just rude, or why do you get so annoyed? Shut down energy. It's like that internal, I wonder why this is, and maybe this is this. So it's I think it's a bit of that process.
Okay, so you're much more than you can, the sort of shame of that meltdown, for instance, gets kind of turned around with, okay, with this diagnosis, I know something happened to me. Yeah. Something has kind of set me off and I can be curious about it. Yeah. I always think about this, when I was a vet nurse, and somebody brought in their dog who had a terrible itchy skin condition, and she said to the vet, he's so crabby, he's snappy at everybody, and the vet was like, he's very itchy. And if we could deal with the itchy, I think the crabby might go away. Yes. And it's kind of, it makes me think about that, that you have this kind of terrible period of time you're talking about, where basically you're pathologized for being crabby because you're dysregulated by your environment. Yes. But what about that process of asking to be accommodated afterwards? You're noticing these things. I don't like people staying too close to me. It's hard when people are in my house and it's messy. And what do we need to learn about supporting people in that process of basically asking the world to shift?
It's a really good question, because it's something talk about a lot, which I think is the missing link to there's, you know, so many more diagnoses happening, which is fantastic, but we haven't really figured out the part after the diagnosis. And it can sometimes feel like you go, hey, I'm autistic, I have ADHD, and everyone goes, wow, I don't think that, or oh my God, amazing. And then it just, things kind of expected to go back to normal.
Yeah.
And there can be that lack of like, well, what does that actually mean? What are the things that need to change? And that can be very jarring, because you can think, well, hang on, I've just explained that this is, you know, how I am, and it should hopefully explain a lot of behaviours or, you know, who I am as a person. But I think it's then you almost have to reinstate it to people. And it's a conversation I have a lot with my mum, and she's been great. I've had to kind of constantly reinforce, like, hey, I can't do, you know, I need space. Like, we just went on a family cruise, and there was quite a few times when I was like, I need to go back to the room and not talk. And now she understands that, but she's very social and outgoing, and, you know, historically would want me there socializing all the time, which I can do, but I now know that I don't have the same, you know, you kind of don't have the same. It's like once, we've spoken about this before, it's like once you know something, you are more aware of it.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of that too.
Oh, yeah, that it almost like it gets worse.
Yes.
You're like, wow, I'm really noticing my social battery going down.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's almost a bit like, I wish I'd never known that. Like, you know, I can feel it. It happened to me about a month ago. I went to a party because I hadn't really socialized all year, and at 10 o'clock I just was like, oh my God, I can't even string a sentence together. It had just drained completely. So I think it's just reminding people of, you know, these are the things that I need, that I've identified are really full on for me, or these are the subtle kind of accommodations. And there is a bit of a push-pull, I think, that happens where it's like, if someone's known you as one person for a significant amount of time, there's an adjustment period, I think, which can be a bit tricky. Some people it's really easy, some people it takes time, but I think it's about people working together to understand the dynamic.
People must feel bad too. I mean, I know I feel bad for clients that I've had that have struggled, and, you know, years into our work, it's taken me that long to say, hey, how about this? Or with friends and family, where I think, you know, I have my own share house, the other side of the share house, where I've gone, why can you not keep the kitchen clean?
Yeah.
How hard is it to be on time? You know, one of my absolute best friends.
Yeah.
The war we had about the fact that she could never be on time.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember ringing her up and saying, I am so sorry. Like, I had no idea. I really read that as you didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
I can see, like, it went with all of these other things.
Yeah.
And I must have been an absolute nightmare to live with. And I really thought I was that's an adjustment people have to go through.
Totally.
Yeah.
I guess it's that thing of like, when you know better, you do better. Because like, if you don't know it, you can't, you know, we do take these things as like, oh, that person's, you know, really rude, or like that person's always late. They obviously don't care about, you know, and it's like, until you have the understanding, which was something that one of the participants said, which I loved, was like, was that she had reasons, she didn't need excuses.
Oh,
and
that's so
that
good.
It's so true, because once you have reasons, you're not scrambling to make excuses and people are getting annoyed, and vice versa. It's like, well, this is the things I struggle with. Yeah, it's a interesting, definitely a dynamic that I think is ongoing, and I wish there was maybe a little bit more support around how to manage those, because I think managing relationships post-diagnosis is huge.
Yeah. How do you have that conversation with people? What's supportive for the people in your life who are neurotypical to understand?
Yeah.
I want to go back to something when you were talking about sensitivities, because it feels like it links to the naturopathic perspective of your work, which is, when you were saying, identify this sensitivity, I notice it more, I feel it more. But I imagine in that sort of masking of it, you get a much more, we know you get a much more generalized anxiety and stress as you're pushing something down. What are some of the health issues, that's the sort of intersection of the body with being neurodivergent that you see in your practice as a clinical naturopath?
I see a lot of, and I've had a lot of these conditions too, a lot of the same conditions. So there'll be a history of anxiety, probably periods of pretty significant depression, and then there's all the kind of co-occurring stuff. There's a really high significance of thyroid conditions, of polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis. There's hypermobility, Ehlers-Danlos, and then a sort of skew off of that is mast cell activation syndrome. There's, I'm trying to think of them all, there's gastrointestinal issues, which are very common because of the gut-brain axis, skin conditions, it just goes on, but they're all very linked, and a lot of it is nervous system dysregulation, a lot of stress, which is then caused like an autoimmune condition to just pop out of nowhere. They're the real main ones. There's probably a few that I'm missing, but basically all organs are going nuts because there's something going on. And if you add having alexithymia on top of that, so you have no idea what you're feeling, if you feel good, bad, there's just all this emotion sitting there, and it's got to go somewhere. So it'll often go, to a cell and make it go crazy, or it's really really interesting.
So that people are really suffering across the board in terms of both mental health and physical health, which as you describe it, what feels like a real kind of cornerstone of women's health and health of all people who are outside of the gender binary, which is kind of spot fires. Let's treat this, and let's treat this, and what's wrong with you here, and let's gaslight you here. And so do you see, when you're looking at it as a naturopath, and now on your way to being a psychologist, do you see this as something that needs to come together for people in that diagnostic process as well?
Yeah, I think like the underlying neurodivergence is huge, because then you kind of put all the puzzle pieces together and you're like, oh, okay, because there's so much overlapping with all these conditions. And it's interesting, there are a lot of the conditions that aren't very researched, that aren't, they're the sort of stuff you go, I mean, I have almost all of the conditions that I listed, and you can go and, get the diagnosis, and then that's kind of it from the medical perspective. There might be, a medication or something, if you're lucky, but if you don't want to go down that route, it's really like, okay, well, and then it's just the list gets bigger on, people's file at the GP. But there's, it's a lot of the, like, mast cell activation syndrome is huge. It affects a lot of neurodivergent people because of their hypermobility, but most people go, what are you talking about? I asked my GP for a referral, and she was sort of like, oh, maybe, she just had no kind of, I'm thinking, well, because I've got this and this, and I'm thinking in that sort of way. And it's no, not to say that she's not fantastic, it's just the difference in what we learn and treat. And it's very, very much a big area that I think will only get bigger with the more diagnosis and the more that our understanding changes.
So then we're talking more widely in terms of what we need to learn, particularly in the mental health professions, is, it sounds like, being able to support people to understand the relationship with their diagnosis and their physical health as well, advocate for them with their physical health practitioners, advocate for different treatments and different supports.
Yes.
Okay. Rather than, I think, what I see happening to a lot of my autistic clients is misdiagnosis with primary anxiety, which then leads to a misdiagnosis of any kind of anxiety-related so-called health conditions. And you're really saying, I think, the diagnosis can, in itself, in the kind of lack of shame or the acceptance of these things, allow people to have a much more regulated nervous system.
Yes.
And I imagine hormonal system on some level as well.
Yeah, I think it can still be tricky for people, I think, even once they get the diagnosis, if their life is trying to still fit into a very neurotypical way of being. But if they're able to make it as neurodivergent friendly as possible, I think that there's a lot more, because stress is just so prevalent in our society, and especially if you're a neurodivergent person trying to fit into a neurotypical world, the more that you're able to make accommodations for yourself and then also try and have those around, the more that you can really just turn down that extra noise that is really likely to increase feeling dysregulated, and a big driver of a lot of, I had chronic gut issues for a really long time, and they're pretty much non-existent now because of how different my life is. But that was also changes that I was making before I got diagnosed, because I'd hit a point of autistic burnout, which is usually when the body will say, enough, so it'll do it for you.
We're shutting down completely.
Literally. It will say, we are not doing this anymore. So you either sometimes have the ability to make the choice, or it goes, nah, this is happening.
Taken away from you.
Yeah.
What are some of the accommodations that you made that have helped settle your system?
So I will never work full time again. I worked full time for a decade when I was in my 20s, and then I tried to work full time a couple of times here, and the last time I did was that triggered a really intense period of autistic burnout, and I just was like, I cannot. It was crazy commuting. It was an hour of peak hour traffic each way, being in a really hot environment, completely overstimulated, weren't allowed to talk, had to, log on and off for a half an hour break. It was very, very structured. So that was something I was like, that is just something I'll never do again. I think just having a lot of alone time is really important, and being able to spend a lot of, it's often some of the stuff, and I think about this a lot too with, before I knew I was neurodivergent, the recommendations I would give to clients about healthy practices.
Teach what you need to learn.
Exactly. And now none of it was, obviously some of it's good, but you get taught, when we were learning to be a naturopath, you've got to chew every mouthful 20 times and sit up straight and, take 20 minutes and don't watch any TV and sit at the table and, all these things are really nice in practice, but for a neurodivergent person, they might really enjoy eating in bed, watching a TV show, doing stuff that's more regulating to them. So it's things like that where I just learned to reduce the shame, because I had a double layer of shame of what society thinks is appropriate, and a very good naturopath would think was appropriate, and then what actually works for me.
I'm in bed with my Danish crime or something, and I'm feeling good. This
exactly.
Working.
So it's a bit of it's learning those things, but reducing my output was a huge thing, because I can be very extroverted and outgoing and social, but deep down inside there's a very introverted, quiet person that it gets very overwhelmed, and it took me a long time to hear her. So
okay. And that's a kind of a hard process to be able to do that, but there's something that you said that really strikes me, particularly at the moment when there's so much kind of bullet point psychological advice for people, about self-care and stress management, and how it is not one size fits all by any stretch of the imagination. So it sounds like that's also something that would be useful for people to, in terms of our work with clients, thinking about, okay, this recommendation about, for instance, chewing your food, or all that stuff about eat without distractions, or do this without distractions. Who is that for, and who does that suit? And you're talking about actually getting people to notice, when do you feel soothed? Yeah, when do you feel comforted? What actually recharges your battery?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's different for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's not a blanket sort of thing of 10 minutes of meditation. Some people find meditation really overstimulating, which could sound kind of silly, but
no,
it
the interior of my mind is not always something I want to connect
exactly. I remember having this conversation with a friend who's also autistic about because there can be a lot of issues with food and finding food, what to cook, really overwhelming, or not knowing what you feel like, or wanting safe food. And I remember going through a period where I really loved buying those packaged salads, pre-chopped stuff, and I was like, oh, but it's single-use plastic, and it's so. And my friend was like, yeah, but fed is best. You can't be doing everything perfect all the time. It's like, if you're making it a bit easier for yourself to just have something that's kind of pre-made, that's good and nutritious, like, yes, the single-use plastic's not great, but it's reducing all of those bits of shame that we're trying to, constantly do all the right things. And that's the stuff that can make you feel very overwhelmed. And it's like subtle things that build on top of themselves. So, yeah.
So it's almost like you're saying, more widely, that a more accommodating environment for neurodivergence is not just, kind of being responsive to sensitivities, but actually scrapping the whole kind of public advice about what is good or not good for self-care, interpersonal care. So the last thing I want to ask you is, as part of this kind of research in your own experience of going through the process of diagnosis and now the process of educating everybody in your life and continuing to sort of check in with what works for you, what are your plans about putting these two parts of your life together? The clinical naturopathy part, the psychology part. Is that something that you've thought about?
I think about it a lot. Unfortunately, as it stands at the moment, naturopathy isn't part of APRA, so it's a little bit tricky to bring the worlds together.
Yeah.
But my hope is that in the future it might be a little bit more intertwined. But I focus a lot on mental health with my naturopathy clinic, and part of the reason why I decided to study psychology was that I could just see there was this gap with my clients that had, all this health stuff, this long-standing anxiety, depression, and there's a limit to, my limitations of what I can do as a naturopath without sort of overstepping. So that informed my decision to also become a psychologist. So I see that the two kind of just coexist, even if I can't necessarily work with them together as yet. But I think to have a psychologist that has that understanding of nutrition, that has that understanding of lifestyle and neurodivergent affirming lifestyle changes, so things that are actually appropriate to recommend, I think that that's invaluable. So that's stuff that I hope to sort of infuse as a psychologist, and also my tools of learning from psychology kind of infuse the naturopathy. So they're kind of coexisting together.
Yes.
And hopefully one day they'll come even closer together. But I think that they kind of blend back and forth. Yeah.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
No
that
worries.
was really incredibly helpful.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
informative.
Thank you.
Cairnmillar is more than just a not-for-profit organization. It's a vibrant community of students, clients, staff, alumni, and generous donors. Our hearts beat for better mental health, which has driven us for over 60 years. At CMI, we believe in a dynamic interplay between training, research, and clinical practice. These three pillars form our triple helix, each strengthening and informing the other as a registered health promotion charity. We've been pioneers in counselling and psychotherapy in Australia, and our purpose is to enhance mental health through accessible psychological services and innovative professional education. That's where How's That Working For You comes in. This podcast is our way of sharing the extraordinary insights, anecdotes, and life lessons from the mental health field. We're pulling back the curtain to offer you a unique peek behind the scenes, aiming to deepen your understanding of this remarkable space. I'm a senior lecturer at CMI. I'm a feminist psychotherapist, supervisor, and researcher. I've worked in agencies and in private practice, and I've trained in a number of modalities, including emotion-focused therapy and existential psychotherapy, and I have a primary interest in anti-oppressive practice. Thank you for listening to How's That Working For You, a podcast for the therapy curious. This has been your host, Dr. Zoe Krupka. This podcast is a space for open conversations, but it's important to remember that what you're hearing are the personal experiences and thoughts of me and of our guests. While we're here to share insights, please don't take any of this as advice. We're all wonderfully unique, so if you have therapeutic concerns, it's best to chat with your healthcare professional. This podcast was brought to you by the Cairnmillar Institute. For more information about our organization, the services we offer, and how to donate, visit our website at cmi.edu.au. You can find links and more information about each guest in our episode show notes. Find us on all major podcast platforms and stay tuned for more inspiring episodes.